Before we begin, I want to make an important disclaimer. The information discussed in this presentation comes from publicly available sources, including news reports, public records, online research, and commentary. Throughout this program, you may hear opinions, analysis, theories, and speculation. Those should not be interpreted as established facts unless I specifically identify them as such. No individual discussed in this program is being accused of committing a crime. The purpose of this presentation is to examine publicly available information, discuss the timeline, and ask questions about an ongoing investigation. Everyone should conduct their own research and reach their own conclusions. And most importantly, every individual is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty in a court of law. Today, I want to talk about something that I believe deserves a closer look in the Nancy Guthrie investigation: Nancy's Apple Watch. Yes, I know, Nancy's Apple Watch again. I am obsessed with the potential biometrics and location data on Nancy's Apple Watch that could have significant investigative value. An Apple Watch is much more than a device that tells time. Depending on the model, settings, and how it was being used, it can collect information about heart rate, movement, sleep, exercise, location, communications, and even certain emergency events. So the question I keep coming back to is simple. What could Nancy's Apple Watch tell investigators about what happened to her? And just as importantly, what information, if any, were investigators able to recover? Why am I so obsessed and interested in Nancy's Apple Watch? Because the information associated with a wearable device can be very personal to the person wearing it. Think about Nancy's normal patterns: her resting heart rate, her heart rate while moving, her activity around her home, whether she walked outside, and potentially what was happening while she slept. Depending on the model and settings, there could also be temperature, sleep, activity, or location-related information. That raises an important investigative question. Was law enforcement able to retrieve usable information from Nancy's Apple Watch or associated Apple data? And if they were, what might that information tell us about Nancy's final known hours? These are questions. We should not assume investigators recovered this information unless authorities confirm it. Before we get into the health information, it's important to understand just how much an Apple Watch can do. The watch can track everyday activity, things like steps, calories, workouts, walking, running, and other movement. Many models also have built-in GPS that can be used when recording outdoor workouts. Now, individually, those things might not sound particularly important, but in an investigation, patterns can matter. If someone normally has a predictable level of activity and that pattern suddenly changes, investigators may want to understand why. So we're not simply talking about a watch, we're talking about a device capable of documenting portions of someone's daily routine. An Apple Watch can also function as a communication device. Depending on how it's configured, a person may be able to receive or respond to text messages, make and answer calls, receive notifications, access email, and use other communication features. The wallet feature can also support Apple Pay, payment cards, boarding passes, tickets, loyalty cards, and certain digital keys. Again, I'm not saying Nancy necessarily used all of these features. We don't know that from the information in this presentation. That's exactly why identifying which Apple Watch model Nancy owned and how it was configured could be important. What features were available and which ones was Nancy actually using? Now let's talk about navigation. Apple Watch can provide turn-by-turn directions, maps, compass functions, and, on supported models, features such as backtrack and waypoints. This is where we have to be careful. Having these capabilities does not automatically mean there would be a complete record showing everywhere Nancy went. But it does give us another question worth asking. Was there any location or navigation information associated with Nancy's watch that could help investigators reconstruct her movements? Even a small piece of reliable digital information could potentially help establish a timeline. Another interesting aspect of the Apple Watch is its connection to other devices. It can interact with an iPhone. It can help locate or ping Apple devices. It can even act as a remote control for an iPhone camera. And depending on someone's home setup, an Apple Watch can interact with compatible smart home devices, things such as lights, locks, thermostats, security cameras, and garage doors. I'm not suggesting Nancy necessarily had or used any of these smart home features. The presentation doesn't establish that. But from an investigative standpoint, it raises a broader question. What devices and services were connected to Nancy's Apple ecosystem, and could any of them contain useful information? This is where the Apple Watch becomes particularly interesting to me. Depending on the model, the watch may collect different types of health information. That can include heart rate measurements, high or low heart rate alerts, irregular rhythm notifications, sleep information, wrist temperature estimates, and other health related information. Some models also support ECG functionality. Imagine having a baseline of someone's normal activity and health patterns, and then being able to compare that with an unusual period. No one else could wear Nancy's watch and have the exact biometrics. Nancy had a pacemaker which regulated her heart rhythm, which is unique to Nancy alone. Even if her pacemaker was set to regulate her heart rate near 60 beats per minute, no one else would have the same fluctuations in heart rate with activity and sleep as Nancy. That doesn't automatically tell investigators why something happened, but potentially it could provide another piece of the timeline. The key is determining exactly which watch Nancy had, which features were enabled, and what data, if any, was actually preserved. Let's focus specifically on heart rate. Apple Watch can provide different heart rate measurements, including current heart rate, resting heart rate, walking average, and recovery heart rate. It can also provide alerts for unusually high or low heart rates when those features are enabled. On supported models, ECG functionality can record a single lead electrocardiogram. So here's the question I would want answered. Was there usable heart rate information from Nancy's watch around the relevant time period? And if there was, did investigators see anything significantly different from Nancy's normal pattern? How long did she have this Apple Watch? Did she use the Apple Watch Health app? If she used the Health app, how long did she use the app? 4 days, weeks, months, years. Heart rate data by itself would not tell us exactly what happened, but when combined with other evidence, timestamps, and activity information, could potentially become part of a larger timeline. Some Apple Watch models can also collect blood oxygen information where that feature is supported. Newer models with temperature sensors can track changes in wrist temperature during sleep and identify trends over time. It's important to emphasize that these measurements have limitations. For example, the presentation specifically notes that blood oxygen measurements are not intended to diagnose medical conditions. For this investigation, however, my larger question isn't about diagnosing Nancy, it's about the digital timeline. What information was being recorded? When was it recorded? And when did those normal patterns change? Some Apple Watch models can also collect blood oxygen information where that feature is supported. Newer models with temperature sensors can track changes in wrist temperature during sleep and identify trends over time. It's important to emphasize that these measurements have limitations. For example, the presentation specifically notes that blood oxygen measurements are not intended to diagnose medical conditions. For this investigation, however, my larger question isn't about diagnosing Nancy, it's about the digital timeline. What information was being recorded? When was it recorded? And when did those normal patterns change? Apple Watch also includes important safety features. Depending on the model and configuration, those can include fall detection, crash detection, emergency SOS, check-in, and emergency calling capabilities. That immediately raises another set of questions. Was fall detection enabled on Nancy's watch? Was emergency SOS configured? Was there any emergency event recorded? Was there an attempted call or notification? And again, I'm deliberately phrasing these as questions. The existence of a feature doesn't mean that it was enabled, triggered, or that investigators recovered information from it, but these are exactly the kinds of questions I would like to hear addressed. So, after looking at everything an Apple Watch can potentially do, we're left with several important questions. What model Apple Watch did Nancy have? Which features were enabled? Did Nancy normally wear the watch to bed? And perhaps one of the most important questions, where was Nancy's Apple Watch found? We were told that Nancy's watch was found on the floor by the foot of the bed. Did Nancy drop it there? Was it staged there by the perp? Did it drop there during a struggle? And what information, if any, did investigators recover from the watch itself or from associated Apple data? These questions appear at the heart of the final slide of this presentation. Until authorities provide answers, we shouldn't turn unanswered questions into facts. But we can keep asking the questions that I'm completely obsessed about. Because ultimately, this isn't about an Apple Watch. It's about reconstructing Nancy's final known movements, understanding what happened, and answering the most important question of all. Where is Nancy Guthrie? Thank you for your time and attention as we continue searching for the truth and shutting out the noise. Please like, subscribe, and leave your comments below.